In today's video, I'm going to be covering the Godzilla Showa series sequels. There are so many Godzilla movies, I won't have time to do one at a time. This will be a little bit easier. Making a video on the different Godzilla sequel eras. Plus, there's a new Godzilla vs. King Kong movie coming out this year, with 2 different cuts of each Godzilla movie. I'm only talking about the Japanese cuts, with some exceptions, which you'll see later on in the series in this video. Me and my dad did a video on the first Godzilla original movie, link in the description, which deserved its own video essay analysis. A little recap of the first Godzilla movie. It was a serious anti-war sci-fi horror drama with a political message. As you saw in my opening for the background, I have the Blu-ray set of the Criterion Godzilla movies, from the first one to the Terror of Mechagodzilla. This is a great Blu-ray set, highly recommend it. It's worth it, especially for die-hard hardcore Godzilla fans. In the past, when you wanted to buy a Godzilla movie, you had to buy them in like one at a time, or maybe double packs with the Blu-rays or DVDs, depending on which one you got. And part of the reason why it was illegal distribution with the licenses when some of these movies were distributed by American studios at the time. Also, the only downside too, just like the Planet of the Apes Blu-ray set, you can't fit this on a DVD shelf. You have to fit it on your bookshelf instead. It's just crazy, but still worth it. Highly recommend this thing. Another thing what's cool about this Godzilla set right here too is that when you open it, it's like a book. It has a little description of each. A little description of each Godzilla movie. You get the point. Then in the back has all the Blu-ray sets. Hopefully someday Criterion, Shout Factory, or someone will do the same for the Heisa Godzilla series, the Millennium series. Have them on a Blu-ray box set with each different Godzilla era series sequels. Also, when I was a little kid like 20 years ago, it was hard to find the Japanese cuts. You can only find them at conventions at that time. To start this video off, I'm going to be talking about Godzilla Raids again from 1955. This one came out 1 year after the first movie and before the American cut, Godzilla King of the Monsters with Raymond Burr. The first Godzilla movie was directed by Ishiro Honda, but he did not direct this one. Godzilla Raids Again was directed by Matoshi Oda. I'm not sure I'm saying his name right, to be honest. It was the first Godzilla sequel, the beginning of franchising the series. It's not the worst one, just tries too hard. It was only made for a paycheck. It forgets what the first movie represented, how it had a serious anti-war political message on nuclear war. And this one is more of like your basic generic sci-fi giant monster B-movie. The characters are not interesting or complex like the first movie. They are very bland and forgetful. The only character that comes back from the first movie is Dr. Yamane, played by Takashi Shimura, is the only character from the first movie to come back. He only makes a small appearance in this movie. Too bad he was not the main focus of this movie. That would have made more sense. I also guess the actress who played Emiko was not available, or maybe not interested in coming back for this sequel, but who knows. We later saw her in at least Godzilla vs. Destroyer, which we'll talk about later. This is the only Godzilla sequel from the Showa era that's a follow-up to the first Godzilla movie. After that, each Godzilla sequel had no follow-up to the first movie, became your basic, sequel/reboots. In America, this film is called Gigantus the Fire Monster, which does not really make any sense, to be honest. I've never seen the American cut version of this movie, so no comment. As I mentioned earlier that I'll be sticking to the Japanese Godzilla cuts, I will briefly explain what they call the American cuts when these movies were distributed by American film companies. This is my second viewing watching this movie for this video. The Monster Godzilla fight to Anguirus is pretty cool. That's the only good highlight of this movie. This was the first time Godzilla fought against a big giant monster, which would basically become a tradition throughout the rest of the Godzilla series. And here's a little fact for you Star Trek fans. George Takei, Mr. Sulu from Star Trek, is in the American cut. That was his first movie at the time before he was big on Star Trek. It's not the worst movie, it's just a rush production that just had potential but didn't succeed. Just like Son of Kong, it was rushed but had potential. There's really not much else I have to say about this movie. And what's funny is, the first Godzilla movie had a fast-paced rush production, but yet somehow it worked. This is definitely a Godzilla movie I'm probably never going to be in a rush to rewatch ever again. Here are Christian's thoughts on Godzilla Raids Again. You will see him throughout the entire video, giving his honest thoughts on each Godzilla movie.
So, Godzilla Raids Again, it was the first Godzilla sequel. It's really the film that kind of made Godzilla a franchise, whereas the first one, I think, is just a great standalone film. This is the one that officially kind of started this as a franchise. It's the one that made Godzilla a franchise character. That being said, I'm not the biggest fan of Raids Again. I find the film to honestly be kind of boring, and you could also tell it was rushed. And to me, it kind of tries to emulate the first Godzilla movie a little bit, but I think it just kind of fails at it. It's nowhere near as dark or as powerful as that original film was. It really is just a B-movie, and I like B-movies, but this one, it just doesn't do anything for me. But I will say, if you do see this movie, watch the original Japanese cut. There was an Americanized version called Gigantus the Fire Monster, and that one is pretty freaking awful. So yeah, if you're gonna watch it, watch the Japanese cut.
King Kong vs. Godzilla, the third Godzilla movie in the series. This movie has no continuity in the first two previous Godzilla movies. The only little continuity from the last two movies when they find Godzilla frozen and how he end up in the last movie. But you need to watch Raids Again before seeing this movie. There's also no continuity with any of the previous first two King Kong movies. This movie was a comeback from King Kong. If you took Godzilla out of the equation in this movie, this could have been Toho's version of King Kong. I'm not sure if I mentioned this in my King Kong video. Believe it or not, there was a Japanese King Kong film released around the same time as the original King Kong, but unfortunately it's a lost movie. It would be interesting if they found this movie. It was also the beginning of Godzilla movies being geared towards more children. Around this point in time with Godzilla movies, they were starting to get a little bit goofy and campy. It had its moments being comical at times. This was the first Godzilla movie shot in color. I love the concept of this movie where Godzilla fights another big giant monster icon who's well known and famous as him. It was cool to see King Kong fight a big giant octopus, as usual, homage to the first movie where he breaks a monster's jaw. Gotta keep the tradition alive. Kong Skull Island paid tribute to that scene from this movie. Seeing the island natives chant a song to King Kong to go to sleep was good. Even though I did like this movie, I don't like the look of King Kong. He looks like a cheap teddy bear that someone bought at a store. I'm not used to seeing King Kong in a rubber suit. I'm used to stop motion animation. I guess I'm a sucker for that in King Kong movies. He does a goofy dance that was kinda lame, but I get it, that was the 60s. It was made for a little comedy. King Kong seems to love drinking berry juice. I guess King Kong picked the wrong way to quit drinking berry juice. Only has a little stop motion animation as a tribute to the original King Kong. This is also one of the few King Kong movies where he does not have a mate or love interest. In the original King Kong, when he's on top of the Empire State Building in New York City, in this movie he's on top of a building. I'm not sure which building it was in Japan. But you get the idea. It was a homage to the first King Kong movie. The Godzilla look is pretty cool looking. There are two cuts to this movie, the US and the Japanese cut. I didn't have time to watch both cuts and do a comparison, so my advice, go on YouTube, look at other YouTubers who have touched upon this subject to both cuts of the movie. I have seen the American cut in the past once. I don't think it was bad, but again, hard to comment on something I saw once and forget about it. According to my friend Chris, it was odd and strange that for the music in the US cut movie they were using recycled some Universal Monster movie soundtracks like The Creature from the Black Lagoon. One thing I will say, depending on which version of this movie people saw first, some prefer the Japanese cut or the American cut. For me personally, I only saw the American cut once, but for some reason I like the Japanese cut, but that's just my opinion. For years, the Japanese cut was not released until recent years. The only version of this movie people saw at the time was the US cut. Whether you like the story and the characters or not, the real highlight people watching this movie is the fight scene between Godzilla and King Kong. It's a little outdated 60s fight scene, but you gotta love it, how fun it is, and cool to see these two big giant monster icons fight each other. For its time in the 60s, it was the Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and Freddy vs. Jason. I love it, it was awesome. Beats CGI green screen. I love the concept of this movie where Godzilla fights another big giant monster icon who was as famous as King Kong. Even though there's only one fight scene between King Kong and Godzilla in this movie, they had them all running into each other, but no fight. There's no explanation on why King Kong and Godzilla hate each other. This movie does have some nice, good cinematography shots. Apparently lightning and electricity makes King Kong stronger. That's never been explained before in past King Kong movies. This sounds like something from Frankenstein's monster. In the first Godzilla movie, Godzilla literally smashed power lines. In this movie, he's shy away from electricity, which does not make any sense. This concept comes out of nowhere, it's not explained. Why Godzilla hates electricity all of a sudden. Once again, my friend Christian said in his YouTube video on this movie, originally, they wanted to make this movie King Kong vs. Frankenstein. This original idea goes back to Willis O'Brien back in the 1930s. Despite Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book is in the public domain, despite Universal at that time made Frankenstein from 1931. But I'm not sure how this makes any sense. King Kong would just basically stomp on the monster at the end, or find a way to make Frankenstein's monster into a big giant monster to fight King Kong. This is one of the few King Kong movies where King Kong does not die. My dad saw the American cut when it came out in 1962. From what he told me, he said it's funny to see two guys in a rubber suits fighting each other. I may not be nostalgic for this movie like most people, but I respect why people have nostalgia for this movie. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, as I have always said in the past. My friend Chris is one of them, and he loves the American cut because he grew up on that one. He's very nostalgic for this movie. The character Mr. Taco with the glasses and mustache looks like Groucho Marx. Of course, he's like any gritty, stereotypical businessman, gets mad and upset when the TV ratings are down, and do whatever it takes to get the TV rating systems back on track. The moral of this movie is trying to boost TV rating systems, and the way they think of that, they can boost the TV rating systems by getting King Kong and Godzilla to fight. This movie was also the beginning of Godzilla movies being geared towards more children. Here's a little background story. When I was little in the 90s, or maybe the early 2000s, I remember going to Walmart with my parents to look at the $5 Walmart bin. I found a DVD copy of this movie, but my dad did not buy it for me. Also, the fake DVD poster was misleading. They had the wrong King Kong Godzilla versions. It was King Kong 76 and some other random Godzilla version. I'm not sure which one it was. There was a fake rumor that there was an alternate ending to this movie where Godzilla wins, but unfortunately it turned out to be a false rumor. Crazy how fans wanted a remake to this movie despite lots of people still love this movie. I guess now they have two options. Watch the original for its goofy campiness, or watch the recent 2021 Kong vs. Godzilla for better effects and updates.
So, King Kong vs. Godzilla has a very, very, very special place in my heart. This was my first Godzilla movie. I had to be maybe 3 or 4 years old. My grandparents had this on VHS, specifically the American cut of the movie, because the Japanese cut wasn't available in the US at that time. This was like the late 90s when I saw this movie. But yeah, the American cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla, it's probably my favorite sequel of the Showa era, and I don't know, it's just a movie I have such nostalgia for, and this is one of those rare cases where I do kind of prefer the American cut to the Japanese cut, really for no other reason besides nostalgia, because this is the one I grew up watching. Now, the Japanese version is technically superior, and the Japanese version, even though it's a comedy, does have a lot of interesting satire, really, on the westernization of Japan, and also on capitalism and commercialism, because in the Japanese cut of King Kong vs. Godzilla, you realize that the television station is purposefully bringing King Kong and Godzilla together so it could boost their ratings. In the American cut, they make it look like they do it because they need King Kong and Godzilla to destroy each other, but in the Japanese cut, again, the television studios purposefully bring these two monsters together. So there's a lot of satire in the Japanese cut about television, and again, about the whole westernization of Japan. But yeah, it's one of those deals, though, where even though the Japanese cut is the better version, technically, just on a personal level, I prefer the American version. But there's also, like, some of the fights between King Kong and Godzilla. Sure, they don't necessarily hold up by today's standards, but for me, they're some of the best kaiju fights you'll see in the entire Showa era.
Godzilla vs. Mothra. This movie came out a decade after the first Godzilla movie for its 10th anniversary. This is the fourth Godzilla movie in the franchise. The American cut to this movie is called Godzilla vs. The Thing, but that makes no sense and it's a misleading title. When they say versus The Thing, do they mean the Thing from another world alien monster or the Thing from Fantastic Four? Yes, I get it, the Thing is Mothra, but still, it makes no damn sense. This one is surprisingly better than expected. On my first viewing of this movie, I had the wrong mindset thinking, oh no, this is going to be cheesy, corny, but no, that's not the case with this movie. Before this movie, Mothra had her own solo movie. I'll admit, I've never seen it, but I would like to check it out at some point. I've heard good things about it. Throughout the other future Godzilla movies, we see Godzilla and Mothra fight each other in a lot of different Godzilla movies. This is their first battle against each other. The peanuts that play the twin fairies are good characters. I don't know why, I love the song they play when they resurrect Mothra. I just wish I knew what they were singing in Japanese. You root for them to get the egg back. They don't want money or fame or care about the money. All they wanted was the egg bag that belonged to them. But like a lot of greedy businessmen, they don't care or listen to them. Godzilla's the villain of this movie. Mothra's a good giant monster in this movie. He only fights if there's trouble, and the twin fairies tell him what to do. Even though I did like this movie, it felt more like a Mothra movie than a Godzilla movie, so this is basically a Mothra sequel. Godzilla basically took a backseat in this movie. Godzilla's not shown up until 33 minutes into this movie. His design is pretty cool in this movie, just like Godzilla vs. King Kong. One thing I noticed in this movie, they used leftover sets from King Kong vs. Godzilla. I like the part when they explain the island history of Infant Island. You get a little background story how different it was a long time ago. It also explains why the twin fairies have trust issues on outsiders. This movie is an example of showing that not everyone is bad, evil, or corrupt, and that there are still good people out there who care. The twin fairies gain faith in humanity when they meet the journalists. People say that there's still good people in this world, that they're not all bad at all. I like the hero characters in this movie. They were likable, sympathetic characters, and learned to respect the twin fairies. In a way, it's kind of like one of those movies where the heroes learn to respect nature. Pre-Avatar, Dances with the Wolves, Ferngully, and Pocahontas, but not a love story. The other way the fairies have trust in humanity again when people protest against the greedy businessmen. They don't care about the stupid amusement park ride. They want the egg taken back to the fairies on Infant Island where it belongs. With the opening part being cancelled, I don't feel sorry for these greedy businessmen who are behind not paying their rent on time. In a way, this movie has a little social commentary on nuclear war like the first movie, but done in a less tone way. In a way, this movie is like a journalism type movie exposing the truth on greed and capitalism with corruption of the government. Kind of like All the President's Men or other movies on journalism. The rich businessmen are jerks. They only care about money and their vision. In a way, this was pre-Jurassic Park when you think about it. Way before Michael Crichton's book Jurassic Park, they wanted to create a giant monster theme park just like Jurassic Park, bringing back things that are no longer instant for good reason, do not mess with nature and science. The last movie is about TV ratings. This movie is about satirizing commercialization and corporation. Also, the corporate business greedy jerks wanted to sell Mothra's egg. They get warned to let go of the egg or Mothra will get mad, but of course, they do not listen. The guy kidnaps the fairy, thinking he'll make a lot of money selling them. Godzilla's arrival is unusual. He arrives from the ground from sand like Bugs Bunny. The army resources they use against Godzilla do not work. Missiles dropping a net of electricity have no effect on Godzilla. Godzilla vs. King Kong was about TV ratings. This one's about greedy businessmen have egos and get cocky and don't want to let things go. A social commentary on capitalism. The fight scene between Godzilla vs. Mothra was cool and awesome. After Mothra dies, two more baby Mothra hatch and attack and pick up where they left off fighting Godzilla. Godzilla won the first round, then he lost the second round. Baby Mothra bites Godzilla's tail, spits web at him. Mothra wins, saves the day, destroys Godzilla, the end. Good movie, better than expected. It was fun. Definitely one of my favorite Godzilla sequels.
So, Mothra vs. Godzilla, this was the fourth Godzilla movie, but was also a sequel to Ishiro Honda's 1961 film, Mothra. Mothra vs. Godzilla, I think, is a very, very, very good movie. It's not one of my personal favorites, but I do think this is one of the best Godzilla movies. It's just not one that I watch all the time. But what I like about this one is, this is what kind of starts the really... I mean, technically, King Kong vs. Godzilla did this, but this is what really starts the series into the direction of camp. At the same time, there is a lot of social commentary in this movie as well. Like, there's a lot of commentary on what we're doing to the environment, there's a lot of commentary on corporate greed, and there's also a lot of commentary on the importance of journalism in exposing corporate corruption, and I actually think this one is a pretty good human cast as well. But yeah, Godzilla vs. Mothra, or Mothra vs. Godzilla, is a really, really good movie, and I think if you're getting people into the Godzilla franchise, this is a good one to start with, I think.
Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster from 1964, the fifth Godzilla movie in the franchise. This movie came out the same year as Godzilla vs. Mothra, but by a few months apart. My guess is because it was the 10th anniversary when the first Godzilla movie came out, they figured, what the heck, let's release two Godzilla movies for the 10th anniversary in the same year. I thought this one was alright, but it seems to be a mixed one for Godzilla fans, I've noticed. People complain about this movie trying too hard to appeal to audiences, how it has too many subgenres blended into one, how it feels like a sci-fi movie, a spy movie, a crime movie, gangster movie, action movie, and a big giant monster movie all rolled into one. Also, again, this movie is also trying to appeal to children with the monsters coming together to fight. I definitely can agree with fans that this is the kind of movie that has too many subgenres mixed into one. In a way, this is the kind of movie that feels like it not make up its mind on what kind of movie it wanted to be. It makes you wonder if there was a lot of student interference when this movie was made. Was this movie supposed to be a different kind of genre movie than Godzilla was thrown at the last minute? You never know, supposedly. I did like the scenes with the princess who was almost assassinated, then she's possessed by aliens throughout the entire movie, trying to warn Earth about the monster crisis that is coming. Throughout the entire movie, some reporters suspect that she's the real princess, but no one believes that, because she looks so different than she usually does. Or they think she really died in the plane crash, not knowing that she was saved by aliens that possessed her. It's hard to have that balance of being invested in the monster story and the human story. But again, according to the two different cuts in the Japanese cut, she was possessed by Venus. The American cut was changed to Mars. I don't know why that is. There's a scene in this movie where a man goes to space. It makes you think how 3 years prior, Russian astronaut Yuri Gagarin was the first man to go to space on April 12, 1961. Two actors from the first Godzilla movie are in this movie being recycled playing different characters. Dr. Zerazawa, Akihiko Harada, plays an officer, and Professor Domini is in this movie, but he's not the same character from the first movie, but he does play a scientist. This was the first time where Godzilla was an anti-hero in the series. Again, just like in the last movie, we don't see Godzilla until 40 minutes into the movie. Rodan is in this movie, who also had his own solo movie prior to this in 1956. I never saw that movie, but again, I would like to check that out at some point, because I heard that's supposed to be a good movie. Just like Mothra, we would also see Godzilla face off against Rodan a few more times in later Godzilla movies. This movie is also considered a sequel to Rodan. The monster King Ghidorah is cool. He basically looks like a dragon that shoots fire out of his mouth. He's another big giant monster icon that Godzilla faces off many more times in later Godzilla movies. One interesting thing I know is that fans point out about Godzilla and King Ghidorah fighting each other. It's like when Batman and the Joker fight. The Joker keeps coming back to face off against Batman. Basically, King Ghidorah is Godzilla's Joker. Like I said before, this was the intro to King Ghidorah, a three-headed dragon that would often see many more times in the Godzilla series. But unlike Rodan, Mothra, and Godzilla had their own solo movies prior to this, King Ghidorah did not have his own solo movie. This was King Ghidorah's first movie debut. Mothra makes another appearance too. Just like in the last movie, Mothra skirts web at both Rodan and Godzilla to put their differences aside and learn to work together to fight against King Ghidorah. Despite Godzilla and Rodan hating each other, the one thing they did have in common was they did not feel any reason to help humans, feeling they were bullied by humans. Mothra tried fighting King Ghidorah but got his butt kicked. Then Godzilla and Rodan beat the crap out of King Ghidorah. This movie, in a way, was one of the early examples of big giant monster brawl fight, like what Marvel did later in the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. You can say it was the Toho Cinematic Universe for its time, but back then no one thought of cinematic universes, and they were not common like they are nowadays. Well, despite its mixed reaction, it still has some cool, giant monster fight scenes with Godzilla fighting Rodan and King Ghidorah. It was one of the early Monster Bash brawls before Destroy All Monsters. I don't hate or love this movie. To me, it's okay. It's hit or miss. I can take it or leave it. It's not a bad movie. It just tries too hard with too many good ideas, and it can't make up its mind what kind of movie it wants to be. The movie is one example when it tries too hard to appeal to everyone for the audience, where in the end, you might be disappointed because you can't please and satisfy everybody. The ending reminded me of Roman Holiday in The Bodyguard. When the princess gets her memory back after being possessed, she thanks the bodyguard for being kind and protecting her when she was possessed. Despite not having a memory of when she was possessed, she was still grateful for him.
So, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster really was a turning point in the franchise. I mean, this was the one that really started to gear the series more towards children, because this is where you see the monsters really start to have human qualities, and this one is also a comedy. It basically is a comedy. I mean, you have Godzilla getting zapped in the nuts by King Ghidorah's gravity beams. You have freaking Godzilla and Rodan bickering like they're two drunk neighbors or something. Like, you have the scene where the fairies are translating what the monsters are saying, and then they go, "Oh, Godzilla, what horrible language!" Like, it basically is a spoof on the first four Godzilla movies. There's also a lot of elements of the 007 movies in this. Like, you can tell they were definitely trying to copy the success of the James Bond films, which were popular at the time. But at the same time, this was the introduction of King Ghidorah, who really is Godzilla's greatest adversary. In a lot of ways, King Ghidorah is to Godzilla what the Joker is to Batman. And I think this one is a lot of fun, actually. It's very funny and very clever, I think.
Invasion of the Astro-Monsters from 1966. This is the sixth Godzilla movie in the franchise. This surprisingly is a sequel to the previous one, but they don't explain any events in the last Godzilla movie. You don't need to watch the last one in order to catch up to this movie. And just like the last one, this Godzilla movie is another mixed reaction. It's either liked or disliked by Godzilla fans. For me personally, I didn't hate or love it. I'll admit it was a little bit slow, boring, and dragged at times. Godzilla was not in the movie that much. It has too many different plot points that don't add up, a little confusing at times. It has all these ideas mixed into one, you end up losing interest. As I said before, I didn't hate this one, it just didn't try too hard, and it makes you not invested in this movie as you want to be. It was not the usual kaiju movie, it has more of an alien invader sci-fi movie to it. This movie was trying to make it more of a sci-fi space movie because space sci-fi movies were big and popular around this time period. Especially I went to the moon by the end of the late 1960s, in 1969. This felt like something out of a Star Trek episode. When you think about it, around this time period for Godzilla movies, they were basically taking whatever was popular and big at the time, like sci-fi, spy movies, James Bonds, and making more into like Godzilla movies to appeal to the audiences. This does the same thing like in the last movie, trying too hard to appeal to everyone. The American cut is known as Monster Zero, which again, I'm not sure why that is. The space set designs were okay and cool. The look of the movie is very good, very futuristic. As my friend Christian said in his Godzilla videos about the look of Godzilla in this movie is that Godzilla looks like the Cookie Monster in this movie. Besides that, this movie reminded how it blended different popular sci-fi movies into one, like for example, Forbidden Planet somewhat, but no AI. Destination Moon, The Day the Earth Stood Still, but no peace offering. The aliens trick the humans. The alien costume designs are a little ridiculous. They don't hold up that well. I mean, they're not horrible. They're just not, like, cool or authentic. A little cheesy and corny, the alien costumes. The aliens who want to trade their fake cancer cure for Godzilla and Rodan. What I'm getting out of this is don't negotiate with aliens, don't trust aliens, or get very too deep into that. As my friend Christian said, these aliens were attached to their technology, that they lost their souls. They used to be human, but technology changed them. How technology take things away from our humanity? Heck, think about the world we live in today's modern-day world of technology. We are all addicted and attached to our cell phones and computers in an unhealthy way. The movie's a little cliche of 1950s and early 1960s sci-fi movie that was already done better before this movie on aliens, technology, and artificial intelligence. The aliens have no water on their planet, which is very well in today's modern-day world and what we're doing with our environment, how the waters are very toxic. The aliens taking control of the monsters remind me a little bit of Ghidorah, a three-headed monster. The characters Glenn, played by Nick Adams, and Fuji, played by Akira Takarada, I'm not sure I'm saying that name right, have pretty good chemistry and okay characters in this movie. It was like something out of a buddy cop movie. But for some reason, I found Fuji's sister and her boyfriend, who was invented to be very boring characters. But I will admit, Fuji was kind of a jerk when he meets his sister's boyfriend, and it's not a prove their relationship. But it's like, dude, she's a grown woman. She has a right to make her own decisions and date whoever she wants. This is the first time in a Godzilla movie where one of the main characters, an American character, interacting with a Japanese character. I don't know much about Nick Adams. I've heard basic biography info about how he had an interesting career as an actor. I read he died tragically from a drug overdose. He was in Rebel Without a Cause and was friends with James Dean. Rebel Without a Cause is one of my all-time favorite movies, but that's a different topic. He had a romance with the actress Kumi Mizuno, who was an alien in this movie. He proposed to her, but she turned him down because she was arranged to be married to someone else. Nick Adams and Kumi Mizuno were also in Frankenstein Conquers the World. Godzilla is once again the anti-hero in this movie. This video won't be complete once I talk about this part of the video. The Godzilla victory dance was funny. The first time I saw this, my reaction was, for real, Godzilla's victory dance felt like something out of a Robot Chicken comedy sketch. I couldn't stop laughing after seeing this scene. This is an example of how Godzilla movies were progressively getting a little bit goofy and marketed towards kids. Director Ishiro Honda did not like this victory dance idea because he was forced by special effects artist Eiji Tsuburaya, I'm not sure I'm saying that name right, to put that in the movie. When I was directing these later Godzilla movies, he did not like how the series was becoming more kid-friendly. He had disagreements with special effects makeup artist director Eiji Tsuburaya on how he wanted to make these movies geared towards kids. Eiji Tsuburaya liked kids, not like scaring kids. That's why he made these movies kid-friendly. The fight scene in this movie is pretty cool. Originally he wanted Mothra in the fight, but not had the budget to put Mothra in this movie. Basically, if they put Mothra in this movie, it would have been a rematch with Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. Because this movie was low budget, when Rodan is attacking the city, they basically use old recycled footage from the first Rodan movie. Again, not a bad movie, just not one I enjoyed as much as I wanted to, but hey, it happens, I'm human.
So, Invasion of Astro-Monster, also known as Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, is kind of an infamous one among Godzilla fans because of that stupid-ass jig that Godzilla does in the movie. But besides that, I actually think this is a pretty good alien invasion movie that just happens to feature Godzilla, Rodan, and King Ghidorah, and it does essentially serve as a direct sequel to Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. They do reference the events of that movie, and I also think Nick Adams and Akira Takarada had great chemistry with each other in this movie, and I enjoy this one quite a bit.
Ebirah Horror of the Deep from 1966. This is the seventh Godzilla movie in the franchise. The American cut is called Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, which Godzilla fans are more familiar with than the Japanese cut. This is the second Godzilla movie in the franchise that was not directed by Ishiro Honda. Instead, it was directed by Jun Fukuda, who would go on to direct 4 more Godzilla movies in the Showa series. Again, this is also another Godzilla film that seems to get a mixed response. Well, again, I would not say it was not great or a masterpiece, but I thought it was fun and entertaining to some degree. Each Godzilla sequel does not top the first movie, obviously, but I find myself enjoying these sequels for the fun of it, having some sort of entertainment value to some degree. Believe it or not, this was originally supposed to be another Godzilla vs. King Kong movie with Rankin Bass teaming up with Toho, but the reason why I did not go through with this was because of too many licensing issues. They wanted Ishiro Honda to direct this movie, but he was not interested. That would have been interesting, a Rankin Bass Godzilla movie and King Kong movie, especially how Rankin Bass was big and popular around this time period with their Christmas movies like Rudolph, Frosty the Snowman, The Little Drummer Boy, and Santa Claus. If they went this direction, it could have been a Toho and Rankin Bass team-up. Also, originally this was not supposed to be a Godzilla movie, it was originally supposed to be a King Kong movie. So basically, the studio interfered with this movie, replaced King Kong with Godzilla at the last minute. Happens all the time. The characters are interesting and likable. You root for the character Yada to find his brother who got lost. The criminal was a bank robber. Despite his past, he helps the young teens for a redemption from his past mistakes. He's not a bad person, he just made bad choices and mistakes. He basically got involved randomly helping the teen characters. Kumi Mizuno, who was in the last movie, plays a different character. She plays a tropical native island girl. She does a good job. She helps and teams up with the teen characters. One of them takes a liking towards her, and hey, she was really a beautiful woman, Kumi Mizuno. Akihiko Kurata is back again. This time he's the main villain of the movie. His character looks like something out of a James Bond movie. Well, the whole movie has that Secret Agent 007 feel to it, but none of the teens and the bank robber are secret agents. They just end up at the wrong place at the wrong time on the island. Seeing the characters break into the army base felt like something out of a Mission Impossible episode. Seeing Godzilla wake up being struck by lightning feels like Frankenstein, or just like what we saw in Godzilla vs. King Kong when lightning struck King Kong to bring back to life. It's a tropical film that doesn't take place in space or some big city like the previous ones. It's also a little adventure type movie like Indiana Jones. It's a straightforward story, not too many subplots like the last ones. Not any social commentaries that come to mind in this movie that I can think of. Despite this movie also being marketed geared towards children, it also felt like they were aiming towards teenagers a little bit too. Before the teens arrived on the island, it felt a little hip seeing them dance at a contest. The Mothra twin fairies are not played by the Peanuts, instead they're played by Pear Bambi. I'm not sure why the Peanuts did not come back for this movie. They were good, but for some reason as a preference, I prefer the Peanuts. Also, I don't know anything about the Pear Bambi singing group. Sorry. Despite Mothra's in this movie, he doesn't do much and takes a backseat. I'm not sure what his screen time was in this movie. I read that Mystery Science Theater 3000 had an episode dedicated to this movie. I never saw that. From watching this movie, it's not the worst as bad as they say or thought it was. It was funny to see Godzilla play baseball and kick the rock like a soccer ball with Ebirah, the big giant lobster. Maybe a new sport was invented by Godzilla, soccer, baseball combined. Ha! Once again, the fight scene is cool. Godzilla fighting a big giant lobster, a little original and different. It's not one of my favorite Godzilla sequels, but I enjoy it for the most part. Also, it's kid-friendly if you have kids. This is a good one for them to watch. Also, don't try to take this movie too seriously. Just sit back, relax, and have fun.
So next we have Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, also known as Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. This is another one that I fucking love. I know a lot of Godzilla fans do not like this one. It is very cheesy, and you can also tell that Toho is working with a much lower budget than the first 6 movies, but I think this movie is a lot of fun. I think it's a great adventure movie, and I actually like the human characters in this movie quite a bit. Now, this was originally going to be a King Kong movie, and you can kind of tell when you watch the film, especially where it seems like Godzilla is showing interest in that native girl. You can tell this was originally supposed to be King Kong, but still, it's a very fun movie.
Son of Godzilla, the 8th Godzilla of the franchise, which was once again directed by Jun Fukuda. Again, this one also seems to be a mixed one. I didn't hate this one. I find this to be too artsy, PC, and aw, cute moments. It had its moments of being a little bit more on the melodrama side, like something out of a Steven Spielberg movie. Also, definitely goofy and campy. I didn't hate or love this one. I thought it was okay, just decent. Hit or miss for me. Minya is okay, he's cute. Some Godzilla fans either like Minya or find Minya annoying. To me, he was alright. I didn't have any problems with Minya. He's like Stitch, cute and adorable. As James Rolfe said in his Monster Madness Godzillathon series reviews, Minya looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. You feel bad when he's born, hatches, the praying mantis beat him up until Godzilla arrives to save him. Minya also looks like something out of a bad claymation stop-motion movie. From what I've heard, that Hanna-Barbera in the late 1970s made a cartoon show called Godzilla and took inspiration from the character Minya, calling him Godzuki. I'll admit, I never seen an episode of that show. I can't make a comment on something I'd never seen before. After he's born, Godzilla walks away. Bad parenting, Godzilla. But Godzilla shows his affection to him, teaching him life lessons. Godzilla did teach his son Minya how to stand up for himself and also teach him how to breathe fire through his mouth. It's funny and cute when Godzilla is sleeping, Minya is playing with his tail like a jump rope. When Minya's not listening to his dad, he's like any kid. He whines, he cries, and he thinks that crying will help him get his way and win his point, which is not true. Godzilla drags him like when a parent says no, not giving their son or daughter candy at a grocery store. It seems to be a common thing in big popular franchises where Batman, Superman, King Kong, and Godzilla have a son. What's next? Ninja Turtle's son, Care Bear's son, Teletubby's son, Terminator's son? Okay, I'm trying too hard, you get the point. But still, just like King Kong Lives, that stupid movie. Why did Godzilla find a man and reproduce a baby? Heck, I didn't think Godzilla could produce having babies. Again, do we want to know how it was done? No, of course not. Heck no. And also, where the heck was Minya's mother in this movie? The characters are okay. They're nothing special or memorable. I like the tropical island girl Rico. Was an okay character. She wanted to leave the island, explore what else was beyond her horizon outside the island. Her romance with Magi was okay, but nothing special. She has a friendly bond with Godzilla's son. She takes an interest in liking Maki, who was a reporter. She introduced him to Godzilla and his son. I have to say, this actress was gorgeous and beautiful who played Rico. The actor who played Maki would go on to be in later future Godzilla movies. And once again, Akihiko Hara was once again his back, but playing a different character again. This Godzilla movie is also a tropical island movie like the last movie. I did like the scenes where Godzilla fights big giant bug monsters like the praying mantis and Komanga, the giant spider. I'll admit, I'm not a spider person. I like giant monster spider movies because it's fictional, but in real life, keep me away from spiders. If you took Godzilla's side of the equation, this movie could have been just easily been a stereotypical giant monster B movie. Godzilla look design in this movie is not the best look. It's not the worst. It's not that good. The more or less I'm getting from this movie is that there's no such thing as perfect parenting. Despite Godzilla's flaws as a parent, he loves his son. I know, I'm probably reading too much into this. The ending was cute and alright, seeing Minya and his father Godzilla hibernate for the winter. Seeing the snow felt like a Christmas atmosphere. There's an idea. Godzilla Christmas Vacation. Ha! This movie is once again kid-friendly and harmless, not a bad movie to put on for your kids. There's not much else I have to say about this movie. Again, not great or perfect film. It's just alright. It's cute, goofy, cheesy, and a little fun. Again, don't take this one seriously. Just sit back, relax, and watch it, and enjoy.
I think James Rolfe probably said it best, where he said, depending on who you ask, this is either one of the best or one of the worst Godzilla movies. Personally, I really love Son of Godzilla. And yes, I would say this is the first Godzilla movie that is outright a kid's film. And it's cheesy as fuck, but it's a fun movie. It really is. This was also the introduction of Minya, or Manila, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and I know a lot of Godzilla fans do not like Minya, but I like Minya. I actually think the thing is kind of cute. And I also like the other monsters in this movie, like the giant mantis, Kamacuras, or the giant tarantula, Spiga, or Kamunga is what he was called in the Japanese version. I have an English dub of this movie on VHS, and in my VHS of the movie, in the dub, they call him Spiga for some reason, but Spiga or Kamunga is a really cool kaiju. And also the ending is actually pretty heartwarming.
Destroy All Monsters from 1968, the ninth Godzilla movie in the franchise. This was basically the Avengers of giant monster movies for its time. This was originally supposed to be the final Godzilla movie. It would have been a good finale, but as fans, we all know how this turns out. We are smart enough not to be fooled knowing this is not going to be the last Godzilla movie. It's cool to see Godzilla fight other popular giant monsters that were big at the time when this movie came out. Godzilla fights King Ghidorah, Rodan, Mothra, Anguirus, Minya, Komanga, Manda, Gorosaurus, Baragon, and Varan. It surprised me Godzilla does not fight Gamera in this movie. Heck, I'm surprised there has not been a Gamera vs. Godzilla movie, and I'm not sure why that is. Some of the other monsters don't have enough screen time, only have small cameos up until they come together at the end of the fight. It's nice to see Ishiro Honda direct this movie. It makes sense to have him direct this movie, since he directed the first Godzilla movie and someone who has experience making giant monster movies collaborate in fight brawls. Funny how this movie takes place 30 years later to the future, 1999. One of those movies where it's not even come close or not even accurate on what 1999 would be like. Believe me, I would know. I was 6 years old in 1999, but that's a different story. I can only imagine what it must have been like being a kid in the 1960s, seeing this movie in the movie theaters, your jaw drop, being shocked like, wow, how cool this is and amazing. Well, I did like this movie, but this is the kind of movie no one cares about the character. The story is, hit or miss. These characters to me were not bad, just nothing interesting. The one character I did find interesting was the alien, the female character, and her group of the Cadillacs, who are mind-controlling aliens with advanced technology. Again, think about the world we live in today, where technology is rapidly getting more advanced each year and decade. We saw this in previous Godzilla movies, Ghidorah three-headed monster, invasion of Astro-Monsters. It was interesting how they were controlling the monsters. This is about the human characters trying to stop the aliens controlling the monsters, so that way they can take control of the monsters again. Besides the giant monster fight scene, it has nice visual shots of Godzilla when he's attacked by the military, when he's controlled by the alien, the flying alien spaceship made me think of Earth versus the flying saucers. The finale is great, seeing Godzilla fight the other big classic Toho giant monsters. This movie is like the Super Bowl, World Series, World Cup, and All-Star for giant monsters fanboys and fangirls. Especially when the monsters are introduced at the beginning of the movie, it's like an all-star game lineup. When the news broadcasters are commenting on the fight, it's like a sporting event. The fight of the century. Despite the long 1 hour and a half hour wait, it was worth and exciting to see the big giant monsters fight each other. This is one of my favorite Godzilla sequels of the Showa ERA series. Fun, entertaining movie. While the characters and story are not the best, it has its flaws, but the real highlight is seeing them all come together and fight. I know that's nitpicking, I can't help myself. Love me some big giant monster fight scenes.
So, Destroy All Monsters, I think a lot of Godzilla fans now know that this was originally going to be the final Godzilla film, and if this would have been a hell of a swan song. This would have been a hell of a way to go out for this franchise, and the film, it's basically a love letter not just to the first 8 Godzilla movies, not first 8, actually, yeah, I think this was the 9th one, so yeah, it's basically a tribute to the first 8 Godzilla movies, but it's also kind of a love letter to Toho's other kaiju and science fiction films as well, because characters from some of Toho's other movies also show up in this. Like, this basically was Toho's version of the Avengers in a lot of ways, but I also find this movie to be a lot of fun. I will say the human characters in this movie are very, very, very flat, but the film really does have the feel of, like, an old, like, pulp sci-fi story in a way. It's really cheesy, but the monster battles are a lot of fun, especially the ending where all the monsters team up and kick the ever-loving shit out of King Ghidorah. Yeah, I recommend Destroy All Monsters a lot.
Yeah. In my video, I mentioned how, like, it was like an All Monsters Attack 1969, the 10th Godzilla movie of the franchise. This movie felt like something out of a Disney Pixar DreamWorks movie. This movie is more of a coming-of-age kids movie mixed in with Godzilla. The American cut is called Godzilla's Revenge, which makes no sense. Who does Godzilla have revenge against in this movie? If he's gonna have revenge against the writers of this god-awful bad movie. The kid has an obsession over Godzilla, fantasizes about being his friend. This movie was shot cheap. They recycled old footage of the previous Godzilla movies, except the first one. Seeing them recycle old Godzilla movie footage felt like when a TV show is coming to an end. They show random clips, best moments from each episode. You'd also say this is the first time in a Godzilla movie where there's no guy in a rubber suit, because all this is old recycled stock footage from the last Godzilla movies. Also, you can say this is a movie where Godzilla is fiction, that Ichiro is a fanboy of Godzilla. Fanboy within Godzilla movie. Minya sounds like an annoying little kid who whines that his parents are not getting the candy he wants at the store, but then Minya talks in a human voice, which doesn't make any sense. I didn't think Minya could talk at all. Minya forms a friendship with Ichiro. Godzilla taught me to fight my own battles. Oh my god. What the heck were the writers thinking of when they wrote this script?
That line sounds like something a kindergarten wrote.
The little kid's name is Ichiro. No, not Ichiro Suzuki, the baseball player. I wish I was talking about Ichiro Suzuki, the baseball player. One of the greatest baseball players that ever lived, and a future Hall of Famer right there. He gets bullied by this group of kids. His parents work a lot. The landlord inventor seems to take care of him and babysit him when his parents are working long hours. For a little kid, he seems to be obsessed with Godzilla and giant monsters and fantasizes on being friends with Godzilla and Minya. And when he goes to sleep, he fantasizes about going to the island. The landlord was a better parent than his real parents. When he shows him his invention of the computer, this was in the 1960s. Who knew that one day the world would own computers? Granted, computers have been around longer than we realized since World War II, but back in that time, only people who worked for the government used computers compared to today's modern-day world, where everyone owns a computer, unless you're Amish. The last movie took place in 1999. I'm not sure if this is the 60s or Toho did not care or think twice about continuity. Seeing him run away and set booby traps on the criminals that kidnapped him felt like Home Alone, but I highly doubt John Hughes was inspired from this movie for Home Alone. I don't think John Hughes does not take me as a Godzilla fanboy. This movie is like Invaders from Mars, a kid's POV imagination. I could be reading too deep into this, but the moral of this movie is stand up or defend yourself against your bullies. But again, I'm overanalyzing that. It's surprising it was directed by Ishiro Honda, who directed the first Godzilla movie. The first Godzilla movie directed is a masterpiece, but at this point in time, he was tired and burnt out with Godzilla giant monster movies. It was only directed for hire. This movie says and shows it all. This is one of the worst Godzilla movies. If you thought Godzilla Raids Again and Son of Godzilla were bad movies, those movies are Oscar-worthy compared to this movie. This is the kind of movie that is harmless and only made for kids. If you have kids, this is a kid-friendly movie for them, and not a bad introduction to seeing a Godzilla movie. This movie is so bad, bland, forgetful, too PC, and I'll probably never rewatch this movie ever again. This is one of the worst Godzilla movies I've ever seen.
So, Godzilla's Revenge, also known as All Monsters Attack, is probably the worst Godzilla movie. That being said, my opinions of this movie have somewhat softened over the years because I do see what Ishiro Honda was going for with this movie. Because if you watch the movie, really what the film is it's a commentary on where Japan was at the time, like economically, where you have both of Ichiro's parents who have to work. He's basically a latchkey kid. He's left on his own all the time, and really that's what the film is about. It's kind of about this kid really sort of escaping the harsh realities of his world, like by escaping into this fantasy world. And a lot of people complained about the stock footage in the film, but in a way that kind of makes sense because this is not, I don't think this is set in the actual continuity of the other films. This is basically set in the real world where Godzilla is just a fictional character, and this kid has probably seen all these Godzilla movies, so that's why a lot of these scenes we see are basically just direct scenes from the other movies. At least that's how I interpret it. Now, that being said, it's not a great movie. It's not even a good movie, but I at least see what Ishiro Honda was going for with this one. And again, I don't think it's a very good film. Technically speaking, it is the worst one, but I do think people need to look at this one in a slightly different light.
That ends part 1 of the Showa ERA Godzilla movie series. Stay tuned for part 2.